And I immediately thought about retailers, because I've always felt sorry for poor retailers listening to that loop of music day after day after day. I mean, I love Christmas music as much as the next person, but they just, you know, must be very tired of it by the time Christmas comes around. But that seemed a little routine. And so it turns out that I didn't get to the East Coast until later in my life, and thus I did not see the Christmas spectacular until I was about 40. And I was so intrigued by this that I immediately went out into Times Square, called my husband on the cell phone and said, I never want to live more than 100 miles from this place. This was, and he's like, I'm in a meeting, and I'm going on, and you know, and there's camels inside, and they're ice skating, and it was snowing, and he was just like, okay, yeah, great, dear. I have now seen it like 5 times. You know, I think being a Rockette would be fabulous, but if you'd come to New York from somewhere else and got a job as a Rockette thinking it was going to lead to, you know, stardom on Broadway, and after 10 years it had led to being a Rockette, you might be a little sick of this. You might have had all the jingle bells you could stand. So I have this disgruntled Rockette in that book. And she ends up,
such a thing as a disgruntled
there is,
Rockette?
her name is Kendra Erickson.
Okay.
and she breaks her leg and she ends up in Vermont for Christmas. And so it turned out to be a really sweet little romance. And in fact, I enjoyed it just very much, and I'm writing the sequel to that because I've been asked for next year's
Christmas
anthology.
Excellent.
Yeah, I'm very excited. In fact, I'm working on it right now, which is a great time to be working on it.
Tell her I need to be in a Christmas anthology.
Honestly, after I had finished what was a pretty, you know, taxing book, it was sort of a treat to just write this little holiday bonbon. So it was fun.
Yeah, well, the 20,000 word book, you know, you don't. I think I write the first 20,000 words of my book before I start losing my mind. So it would be good to be finished with the with the book before I hit the insanity.
No, it
part.
did. It did. It felt good to write something in 5 weeks instead of, you know, I pretty much take a whole year to write a novel.
You just made me think about one of the things that, you know, reading a single thread, because I didn't know really anything about it before I started reading it. But you've got it's in first person, but it's in first person in different voices.
Yes.
Which is that's a heck of a trick. I wouldn't have had to see the heading at the beginning of the pages because I could tell whose head you were in when we went into this new character.
I'm known for having a pretty strong voice.
I thought it was very, very, and you know, and I know these people too because, you know, we've got the woman, the Miss, well, she was from the Midwest, but she lived in Texas.
Evelyn was born in Wisconsin.
She was born in Wisconsin.
And then in her marriage, she went to Texas, where she really never felt quite comfortable. And then after her marriage, she sort of takes a whim, sort of, you know, by golly, I've always wanted to see the fall foliage, and that jerk would never let me. So she gets in her car, and that's really, you know, how her adventure begins.
But the one that I just got the biggest kick out of is Abigail.
Yes.
And I love Abigail because I'm from one of those old New England families. Now, we had the breeding, but not the money. But I definitely
Abigail married her money, though.
Yes. Well, yeah, but she was from a good family. She was from a
good family, and she entered a better family.
But I can just hear her voice because it's my Aunt Adelaide. I'm hearing my Aunt Adelaide's voice and accent when you're doing Abigail. The shop and the kind of the circle of people made me think a little bit of Debbie Macomber. Have you read any of the Debbie Macomber books?
I have read Debbie Macomber's books,
but your styles are totally different.
Our styles are very different.
Nothing alike.
She is, you know, we're writing relationship novels, and so I'm writing about the relationship among. I mean, it's classic women's fiction, and characters do sort of walk in the door. So
yes, they do.
Yes, they do.
Yes, they do. Although I haven't ever based a leading character really on somebody that I knew, but I do it a lot with supporting characters, and not necessarily somebody I know well, but somebody I see or somebody I've particularly really quirky people, and when people are very, very kind of bizarre and odd. There was before I was a writer. If there's somebody that's really, really bizarre, you kind of avoid them because they're a little scary. But then once you start writing, you start stalking crazy people. And the thing is crazy people are used to having people avoid them. So when they catch you stalking them, they want to be your best friend now. And I think probably my funniest example was a man who I found so obnoxious that I couldn't believe he wasn't joking, that really was seriously his personality. And I became fascinated with him because he was somebody I would see around town where I lived. You know, I'd see him at a restaurant, and I'd be like, oh, it's him. And I would go, and he'd see me looking at him, and he'd kind of preen, like,
yes,
oh, she wants me.
She's
you know,
after
and I'm
you.
like, I was just fascinated how anybody that obnoxious could breathe, you know. And I never knew his real name or anything, but I put him in the book, and damned if a resident of that town didn't email me and say, this is
that guy,
such and
isn't
such
it?
who hangs around at these places. And it's like, yeah, it is. that they actually recognize this obnoxious man. But, you know, of course, if you have a really obnoxious person, you can't ever say who they actually were.
Well, and I do some of that. There's one character in here, Wendy Perkins, I think you might remember. She was the realtor, and she has these very kind of the rhinestone glasses that nobody wears,
and the pants too small.
The pants are a little too small.
Lines.
Yeah,
yes.
she's got a VPL going on, and she has this kind of little Lily Tomlin laugh. And I sat next to this lady under the nail dryer one day, and she was so much fun, and I never forgot her. You know.
But I like the best friend from Texas too.
Yes, Mary Dell.
And I wondered, you know, when you started talking about your friend who quilts, is there a little of your friend in Mary Dell at all?
Oh, no. Mary Dell is very much her own person. I knew a woman named Mary Dell in Texas, and she wasn't a quilter at all, but she was a real true Texan, the really warm and lovely kind. And I was living in Texas. I had 2 little babies, and I didn't have a car. And so I would find myself, you know, with nowhere to go. And this lady, she had 2 sets of twins that were in diapers when she was a mom, and she took pity on me. She used to take me around, and, you know, though she was 20 years my senior, she was just really sweet to me, and I've never forgotten that.
That's good. That's nice to, you know, I have relatives from Texas, and I've had relatives from Oklahoma, and everybody's got 2 names.
Yes, there's a lot of 2-name people.
I'm Toni Lee.
Oh.
Because my mother's from Oklahoma.
Right.
I said we're from an old New England family. That's my father's side of the family. But I am Toni Lee. But I was Toni Lee on my book covers, but the, you know, like the art department decided it didn't look as good. So now I'm just Toni Andrews instead of Toni Lee. I just assumed that everything was going to be Toni Lee Andrews, but I was mistaken.
They just informed you.
It didn't work out that way. No. Now, one of the things, a very serious theme in a single thread is that you have a character who has breast cancer.
Yes.
And it's just, do you know any of the figures, what percentage of women? I mean, who doesn't know somebody who isn't?
Everybody knows somebody or has gone through it. And you know, I went through a little scare of my own while I was writing the book, which didn't turn out to be anything. But
had you already decided to put it in the book before you had the scare, or did the scare?
Oh yeah, I decided before.
Wow.
And really, it is a woman in Connecticut who inspired the character Evelyn. There is a lady named Deb Mella, and she owned a quilt shop in Canton. It has since closed, and I was a pretty good customer at her. Gone Quilting was the name of the store for those who used to enjoy going there, and you know, I was a pretty good customer. And she got breast cancer, but there was an email that went out to Deb's customers from her daughter, and she was going to be doing a race for the cure. And as I recall, and this was in, I think, 2005 or 2006, she had informed us that her mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer just 2 days before she was hosting a Quilt Pink event for charity, which is a